Well, greetings. It's Dr. Blevins, and I wanted to provide a brief video overview of a business plan, just really because there is such rich material within the Kaufman curriculum, but there is so much that sometimes just kind of keeping the big picture might be difficult in navigating all that material. And actually, the new version is a little bit different than the previous curriculum that was a little more clear-cut about what to look for inside a business plan. And so I thought I would sort of mirror the previous curriculum just long enough to kind of give you a feel for what you're accomplishing as you write out a business plan. So one way to think about a business plan is that it is basically both your business model and your startup as you're putting this together for someone else to read to see if they might fund your venture. That might be a bank, and it could be a bank manager or someone who's at least in charge of providing business loans. It could be an angel investor. It might even just be a member of the community that is willing to invest in whatever new endeavor you're a part of. So, one way to think about a business plan is having something like this in place as you engender support for whatever new initiative or venture that you're trying to launch at that point in time. Now, the business model, if you remember, is how you basically prove that you have an idea that is viable over the long term. And so that is the business model. And normally, if you remember in the business model canvas, there were things that we were thinking about, like that are part of what's going on from the fact that you know something about your customer, you know the value proposition you're going to offer that person. In other words, what difference it's going to make. That you have some idea of how to both produce and distribute whatever product or service that you want to provide at that point. That there is some profit that you're going to make. It's sustainable. You're going to get paid out of it. And you know a sense of who might partner with you in that work. And so that is part of the business model. And all of that will show up in a lot of ways when it comes to the way in which you put your business plan together from the cover page and its table of contents down through the executive summary, the management and organization plan, the product and service plan, the marketing and finance plan, and the appendix, which can be a pretty big appendix before it's over. But the other part of this to keep in mind as you are thinking about it is also your startup costs. So, yes, if you look over at one side, you are going to try to demonstrate through your business plan that, you actually going to have something to sell or service to provide that is going to cost something. So, you want to make that transparent, but that ultimately you do have some income coming out of it. And then, as a result of your operating expenses, you take those off, and finally, you know that every year you're going to have a certain amount of income by which that organization operates. And therefore, in light of other forms of income, even residual, you have a net income that says, yes, as a model, over time, if this organization continues to work, this venture continues to work, it's sustainable. And you want to communicate that. But the thing that you might also need to communicate in your business plan is your startup needs as well. So, are there particular expenditures right up front? Do you need certain equipment or vehicles? Are you thinking about buildings? And what I mean by that is even storage for whatever you're going to provide. Do you need furniture? Do you need security deposits, things to help provide your venture so that it might be bonded or that you can cover liability, including insurance, for instance? Are there certain kind of initial expenses that you just need to have covered as you begin, or rent? And I think you know as well as I do, a lot of times you decide to rent a space that usually comes with both first and last month's rent. So we're not just talking about your monthly, but what is your upfront committal if you decide to rent a location? Are there professional fees, particularly around property rights and those types of concerns? Do you have salaries and that you're going to start paying people at the very beginning of the project, not after you start making money, but right from the beginning? Are there office expenses? Even if you decide to operate from home, do you need to purchase certain materials so that you can actually have a working office? And are you planning for repairs and maintenance right up front? Not deferring that maintenance, but actually having in place some of the initial funds, say for the first 6 months, so that if you have to maintain vehicles, if you have to do something else as a part of your service and venture, you're already thinking about that and you're building that into how you start up so that you have the money at least to get you through that first round. One way to think about this is that what you're trying to do is demonstrate that in light of the equity that your firm, your business can create, that and in light of the liabilities that it faces, that ultimately your venture will produce assets that actually can provide for the long-term sustainability of that organization. Some of those may be direct assets that you could use right away. Some of them may be indirect assets as you're acquiring certain things. But remember, if you list things like your vehicles as part of your assets, understand if you have a bad year, that might mean raising a conundrum of whether you have to sell that vehicle or do you need it in order to provide your service. Those are the kinds of things you're really wrestling with as you move forward in your business plan is ultimately how viable is your idea when you think about, yes, the ongoing business model and its capacities, but also the startup needs to get the firm, the service, the business running is really crucial. So, what does that look like going forward? Well, the first thing, and again, there are certain elements that go into the business plan. I'm just kind of repeating these for a moment, just to remind you. And previously, it was a lot easier to locate under the fast track material. So, this kind of helped keep everything in place. But I am mentioning over here. So, that cover page, table of contents, executive summary, management and organizational plan, product and service, marketing, finance, and then the appendix. But I'm going to spend a little time on two very important pieces. The first one actually is the cover page. Now, hear what I'm about to say. As a professor, knowing that a lot of people watching this turn in papers who nowadays do not spend time creating elaborate cover pages for 5-page papers or even 20-page papers, but instead sometimes just use name and title at the top. And as someone who's actually had students turn in book reviews with no name or title. They just leave it in the file name. Pausing long enough to know that you have a good cover page is important. So that cover page should include your business name, any motto or tagline that you think is important to help communicate. Remember that elevator speech, that brief imagery, also of the logo, so that people understand both clearly the business that you're providing, but also why and what you envision it to look like. Always include the date that the business plan was prepared. One reason is if it gets circulated and people want to ask questions about updates, they know exactly when it was originally submitted. Yes, it has your name and your contact information, including your business or home address, which may be one and the same when you first start out. Phone numbers. So, yes, your phone number, but I would always include maybe someone else, maybe a spouse, a close friend, someone that if you have your phone on silent, if you're involved in a Zoom session, they at least know how to get to you and reach you if someone is trying to set up an appointment, definitely to launch your venture, as well as email and website if you have it. And I would encourage you to think about at least one social media expression. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be a more of a when we talked about minimum viable product. In other words, it can be just a working beginning, but at least where that kind of information you pre-thought where that might be located is part of what you need to consider in the cover page. Now, I will say this that information needs to be clear and concise and easy to identify and organize and use. Some people use very elaborate opening cover pages with multiple fonts or different kind of styles. Remember, for someone who wants to reach out to you, they need something very clear and that they can easily glance at and know how to contact you through that information. So if you decide to do something as an elaborate first page, make sure then that this cover page is the very next page inside your business plan. You're wasting a page, but in some sense, it's really important that you communicate what is important in and through this cover page so they know how to reach you. Then the next major element that you're going to have is an executive summary. The executive summary is basically a narrative, and it really is the plan in miniature. So we're only talking 1 to 2 pages in length, and it should be very specific and to the point. As a matter of fact, if you one way to think about it is if you have a lot of aspirational language, leave it for later inside the plan. And here you want to be talking about what you will accomplish in those 2 pages. Now, yes, it still includes the venture description, and I would say the pitch of the product or the service provided. If you think about that elevator pitch, it needs to be there. It does need to include a snapshot of the management organization plan. So if you're thinking about an LLC and you've only got one partner, that's fine. That the organization plan is the LLC and your partner is maybe somebody you're working with, but you also articulate what if that's a shared relationship or if there's some kind of sort of unbalanced work that's going on inside that. You can later explain how you develop a full organization, but at least here provide a snapshot whether it's going to be what level of organization and definitely what type of business it is. LLC, B Corp, a benefit corp, C Corp, or a nonprofit, those kinds of things need to be in the executive summary, as well as marketing and financial plans. Now, they don't have to be elaborate in the executive summary since it's narrative, but at least that you demonstrate where you've done a little bit of marketing, hopefully already, and what you plan to do to continue that, as well as what you are envisioning are the big rocks in your finances and how you see basically your services working inside that so that, and to go back to previous slide for just a minute, so that nothing more than having a sense of what you anticipate are net sales versus the cost of the goods that you're providing, and then your operating expenses and your intended then resulting operating income or net income out of all of that. That you can say that in such a way that people know what you intend. That's important inside that financial plan. But that executive summary, again, is only 2 pages. So you know you're trading off giving people what is the meat of what you need to communicate in those 2 pages, knowing then that you hope by stating it in a kind of matter-of-fact way that it produces enough of a comprehensive vision that they'll turn from those 2 pages to the next page inside your business plan. So once you've done that, once you've done that, you've had that executive summary, guess what? Then the rest of your work really is, one way to even think about the venture summary is that it is almost your venture description, almost. You may elaborate on that a little bit more in the next page, but then you can then sort of expand in all these areas as you work through the rest of your business plan. So your executive summary should, even though you'll have a table of contents, your executive summary is almost introduction, if you will, to this book called The Business Plan that provides a way in which you outline then how you're going to articulate everything else that's going to show up in the rest of the business plan. It's a little different than a standard introduction in a book, where sometimes the author will say, and in the upcoming chapters you will find. Here you're basically going to go ahead and state what's the nut of each of those, the most important piece. And then hopefully, as you then work through moving from the executive summary down through these other elements, you can expand on every piece, almost taking a paragraph from the executive summary and expanding out to include the things that are really important. Now, what doesn't have to go into the business plan that can go into the appendix is often one of the real concerns. And the appendix can include all kinds of things from financial templates, sort of all those kinds of templates that actually were offered in Kaufman and all the kind of back end pieces that you've been working on, where you list out things like the expenditures, the operating, the sales, inventory. Your appendix can include resumes of the management team, contracts. Here are all the personnel pieces that are there, personal financial statements, patents, trademarks, business agreements, product brochures. And if you have multiple logos instead of the one that you've presented in the cover page, you can even give samples of maybe different types of logos you're thinking about. The appendix can include reference letters, market studies, photographs of the product or facilities or the equipment. Artwork is one way to think about that. Customers' orders, if you've already started and showing how that, yeah, you have been able to produce some interest. Information supporting what you're doing from an industry study, detailed descriptions of products, maps showing the location of the business, and even credit report for the business. Now, the reason I mention all these appendices is that sometimes we tend to try to pump all that into a business plan. And you may not need, you may want to include that, but always ask yourself, do I really need this to be a part of the plan that someone is reading? Or is it better for me actually to really state in a more concise way what each of these elements are and then offer them later? So, do I have to insert a reference letter in my business plan, or I just merely say that the venture has been endorsed by, and you list two or three people, then include those letters in the appendix? Weighing that out really makes a difference in what you're trying to do. Recognize that a business plan format and just offer some tips as you go. Run somewhere between 25 to 30 pages. Depending on how good your executive summary is, sometimes less is more in the actual plan, knowing that you might have a number of appendices that back up claims inside. Again, use that cover page. Always include a table of contents. That means paginate your pages so that people know where to find what you're interested in. Use subtitles as you're working through different sections around management and organization or product service so that you actually can guide visually and people can read and move to something that they have a question about very quickly. Rely on charts and graphs and bullets as much as possible so that you're being more concise in the plan. Always, always say, do I need this in the plan or is that really a supporting document for the appendix? And a final thing is check your math and spelling. So I'll tell you, out of my own personal experience working with the team, the working up to the very last minute, sometimes not going back through and checking the math can get you in trouble. And I have been famously bad at that. So having someone who as really good as somebody is really important before it's all said and done. Now, last piece, just to kind of give you this finish this overview, is also to think about how will you present that business plan. How do you, in other words, how do you market the business plan? So you maybe have a marketing plan for your business, but how do you market the business plan? Uh, think about making sure you can provide an oral presentation. If you have watched things like Shark Tank, or if you get an opportunity to go and visit one of the things Kauffman provides, it's called 1 Million Cups. And they do this in a lot of cities where people can come and give a pitch over their business. It's great to learn and listen to how other people present their material. I love the 1 Million Cups approach, by the way, because normally they have entrepreneurs listening and then they ask critical questions, much like a business manager would. And you learn to anticipate a little bit of the interaction that might occur. You can't control for it, but at least you can anticipate it. But in an oral presentation, it should include things like a company history and background, the concise product description, the proprietary rights, some of the unique features of what you're going to offer, and at least you introduce what the management team is going to look like. Oral presentations probably should also cover a little bit of that market analysis and the financial picture, the cash needs and the spending. Remember the trinoculars, what we've talked about in other presentations. It's a good place also to suggest might be the growth and spinoff opportunities and that, yes, you recognize the potential risks. You go ahead and anticipate that. Very important as you talk about exit strategy. Now, in Kauffman, a lot of times that's about you, but here, what are the exit strategies for the investor? When is it that you anticipate that the return on that investment, that whoever that person who's helping to fund your work. And whether that return is financial, obviously they may want to know when will they recoup their investment, but also indirect benefits that they might get out of it. A lot of times, even the way in which you will continue to partner with them in other ways and forms are really important. But every investor wants to know, when is it that I know that I can exit out as well? And what do you intend? And definitely one way to think about it, this is crass, is a bank manager's going, are you constantly going to come back to me for money? And they may want that. They may want to, as you scale up, be interested in that. But if they want to go, we can work only so far with you, and that's it. How do you help them know that they themselves will have an opportunity to decide whether to continue with the firm or not? That's really an important thing to think about in the presentation, because they're going to be thinking about that and asking it. Now, if you were to present this in a makerspace in the class that I teach, understanding that is a more creative space and only usually 10 to 15 minutes, then the executive summary ought to be the most helpful component that you're trying to work through. And that means you might, preempt a lot of company history and background, because you want to get to the product, service, and some of the unique features. So you're thinking about what you balance, and look at your executive summary to help you decide what's really important. That's something for you to keep in mind. Final slide, and one final thing to think about is, even as I've talked about this and thinking about a full out business plan, knowing some people are working on maybe a different project and therefore they might only be interested in turning in for the sake of the class, or even they're only at a space where at best they're still working on the business model and the canvas. Well, let me just be honest. Working on a business plan, even if you don't have one completely fleshed out, will often raise questions that will fine tune your business model. And so that it feeds back into this canvas in a way that makes it work better. Now, ultimately, your business model alone is not enough to secure support. People really want to know what those startup costs are, because they want to help you get past that initial phase. And even if you think you can absorb all that yourself, better to be honest with what those needs are than to find out that you don't have, remember the trinoculars, even as you're trying to reach sustainability and manage generating some profit over cost, you don't have enough operating cash to make it go, because your expenses, your startup expenses, just prove to be too great. So use the business plan to help you with the business model. It should do that. But remember that the business plan is there to assure the success in the launch of that model in such a way that you can actually be sustainable and make a difference in the world. Well, I hope this presentation has helped at this point, and blessings to you. We will see you online.